Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, welcome to Introduction to Econometrics. This is going to be a very interesting course for you, because in this course you will not only learn the theoretical steps related to this particular subject, you are also going to learn the computer application of econometrics. That means how several econometrics models can be estimated using statistical softwares, right. So, before we discuss in detail about what are the different types of econometric models and all, so let us try to first understand what exactly is econometrics, what is the meaning and definition of econometrics. There are several definitions available in the literature, but if we combine all those, then basically we will come up with an combined definition of econometrics, and then the best possible way to know the definition of econometrics is just to decompose this word into two components. So, econometrics is basically a summation of two components, econo and metrics. And what is the meaning of econo? Econo basically stands for economics and metrics stands for measurement. So, if I sum it up, that means econometric basically indicates the measurement of economics or economic measurement. Now, the next question comes to our mind when we say measurement of economics or economic measurement, what are we actually going to measure in economics? So, it is basically we are going to use the econometric tools to basically measure the empirical validity of economic theory. So, that means if you look at the definition, it says econometrics is the science and art of using economic data to measure the empirical validity of economic theory by applying mathematical and statistical tools. Now, in this particular definition, there are several important components are used, and we need to learn the meaning and significance of each and every component that are used in this particular definition. First of all, it says econometrics is the science. Now, why econometrics is called science? Because like any other science discipline, if you look at science is basically what is a scientific analysis? Scientific analysis is you basically first observe certain things and then gather data and then try to analyze those data and then you come to certain conclusion. Similarly, in econometric analysis also we will observe certain behavior, particularly some social behavior, and then we will collect data pertaining to those behavior and we will analyze those data and come to a conclusion. And what is the objective of that? Objective of that data analysis is to come up with a conclusion so that we can say whether particular economic theory is valid in a particular context or not, right. And then why it is called art? It is also called art because like any other artists, in econometric analysis the model what we are going to use, you need to learn the art of setting an econometric model, and that will come only after several rounds of practice. So, once you get little more habituated with the subject and gets little bit of expertise, so you will know what is that basically art means here, okay. And then it also says that econometrics is the science and art of using economic data, right? What is economic data? Economic data is basically the data generated from economic decision making. Generally, by economic data, generally we think GDP, money supply, rate of interest, inflation, all those variables. Okay? When we first think about economic data, these are the variables that comes to our mind. But the concept of economic data is actually much broader than GDP, employment, rate of interest, inflation and other things. So, in general, if you try to think about economic data in a much broader sense, the data generated from economic decision making. And if you apply that definition, then you will see that economic data does not only mean GDP, inflation, unemployment and rate of interest, rather many other things. Okay? So, that means econometric tools you can use not only to analyze the data pertaining to GDP, inflation and unemployment, rather in several different contexts you can use this particular technique to analyze with an intention to give the empirical validity of economic theory. And what are the tools that we are going to use here? We are basically going to use mathematical and statistical tools, right? Now, the question that comes to our mind, I will go in detail about what is economic data, but before that, let me explain little more about the mathematical and statistical part from this definition. It says econometrics is basically the application of mathematical and statistical tools, but econometrics is neither mathematics nor statistics. Okay? Neither mathematics nor statistics. So, econometrics is a distinct subject which is distinct from mathematics and it is distinct from statistics also. Now, if I give a small example, the things would be much more clearer to you. What is mathematical economics? By mathematics, generally we may think of, oh, econometrics is then mathematical economics. Actually, econometrics is not mathematical economics, because what is the objective of mathematical economics? Mathematical economics is basically basically represents economic theory using a mathematical model, using equations. For example, we all know the economic theory of Keynesian consumption function, which says that as income increases, consumption also increases, but less than proportionate. Okay? Now, if you want to represent that particular economic theory using mathematical equation, then it will look like your y equals to alpha plus beta xi, let us say this is yi equals to alpha plus beta xi plus ui, okay, where y is consumption, y denotes consumption, and x indicates income, okay. And when I am saying that as income increases, consumption also increases but less than proportionate, how will you specify? You have to put a restriction on this parameter beta, okay. So, beta is basically less than 1 but greater than 0, okay. So, sorry, I have included one error term here, that should not be there, okay. So, my model is basically y equals to alpha plus beta xi, yi equals to alpha plus beta xi. Here I indicates the ith individual. So, yi indicates ith individual's consumption, maybe weekly, monthly or yearly, and xi indicates correspondingly weekly, monthly or yearly income. And then the restriction what I have imposed on beta is greater than 0 but less than 1. So, the job of mathematical economist is done here only. So, mathematical economist will never go to check the empirical validity of this economic theory, right. So, this is called mathematical economics, representing economic theory using mathematical models and equations. Okay. Then what is statistics? That means what is the job of a statistician? Statistician's job is to collect data on consumption, data on income, then statistician will process the data, and then statistician will also present the data using some charts and tables. But statistician will never venture into linking this data, will never use this data to check the empirical validity of economic theory. Someone who does that, he or she is actually an econometrician. So, that means an econometrician's job is quite different from that of a statistician or a mathematician. Mathematician will build the model using mathematical equation. Statistician will collect data on income and consumption, that is a raw data collected by the statistician, and the statistician will represent the data using some tables or charts or diagram. An econometrician will use that mathematical model. Econometrician will also use the data collected by the statistician and then try to analyze the data to give empirical validity of economic theory, right. That is why the complete definition of econometrics, it says that econometrics is the science and art of using economic data to measure empirical validity of economic theory by applying mathematical and statistical tools. This is the complete definition. Now, we will see what are the some examples of economic data, right. So, economic data, these are the some examples of economic data. Let us say that the first example says, does higher income lead to higher consumption? Now, here income and consumption both are economic data because both are generated from some economic decision making. What type of job you will do, how much, first of all, whether you will participate in the labor market or not, that is an economic decision making. If you participate, what type of job you will take up, that is also an economic decision making, and how much labor you will supply in the labor market, that is also an economic decision making, because you will be analyzing the cost or benefit of participating in the labor market and the cost or benefit of supplying each and every unit of labor in the labor market. Because supplying labor, working in the labor market, it has some opportunity cost. What is the opportunity cost? Instead of working, you can take leisure, and that leisure time you can spend at your family, you can watch movies, you can go for social networking, so on and so forth. So, that means I will work up to that point where my marginal benefit and marginal cost of labor supply is equal. So, that means basically what I am trying to say here, that participating in the labor market and how much labor I will supply in the labor market, this is basically an economic decision making. Then consumption is also an economic decision making. What I will consume, how much I will consume, it all depends on the price of the product, what is my need, so on and so forth. So, both income and consumption then generated from economic decision making, that is why both these are economic data. And then econometrician will use the income and consumption data, and econometrician will use the statistical and mathematical tools to analyze that income and consumption data and will check empirically whether increased income actually leads to increased amount of consumption or not. And if it does increase the consumption by what is the amount. So, that means basically in econometrics we will always try to answer the question how much, how much. So, when consumption, when income increases by 1 unit, let us say by 1 rupee or 10 rupees or 100 rupees, what is the corresponding increase in consumption? As theory says, when your income increases by 1 rupee, consumption will increase, but definitely less than 1 rupee, right. So, this is the first example of economic data. Then we will take another example. This is also an interesting example or interesting research question rather to answer. The question is, does small class size result in better learning? Because we all are concerned about while sending our kids to school, we see what is the student teacher ratio, because we believe that smaller is the class size, better would be the learning outcome. Now, what should be the optimum class size? If the class size is smaller, then of course there would be better learning, but there is a cost involved if you want to have smaller class size. Smaller class size means you have to employ many more teachers, instructors, you need to have many more classrooms, you need to have many more more amount of infrastructure, so on and so forth. So, that means having a smaller class size involves some amount of cost. So, this class size in that sense is an economic data. It comes from an economic decision making. The administrator or policymaker will decide about the optimum class size depending on what is the cost and benefit of a reduction in class size, right. So, they will see what is the extra benefit in terms of additional learning that the students are getting, and they will try to weigh this extra learning with the extra cost that is involved with the smaller class size. So, that is why as an econometrician will take the data on class size measured by number of students and data on learning. You can measure learning outcome, let us say by marks, how much marks the students are getting in mathematics or English or any other subjects. There are different ways of measuring learning outcome, but this is one of the easiest measure of the learning outcome. So, then this is also an economic decision making. Then third example, what is given here, does profitability of a firm determine the returns of its stock? So, stock return and profitability both are coming from economic decision making, because profitability, how much profit a particular firm will generate, that depends on what is the output the firm is producing, what is the advertisement the firm is giving, what is the R&D expenditure the firm is incurring, so on and so forth. So, that means profitability is also coming from an economic decision making. Similarly, the returns to stock, even if you are profitable, you may not be giving so much dividend to your shareholders. So, it again depends on who is there in the board and how the firm is valuing the stakeholders. So, both the things are coming from economic decision making. That is why both are economic data. An econometrician can analyze the profitability and stock return data to come to a conclusion whether actually stock return is related to profitability or not. If yes, then how much? For every additional increase in profitability, every additional unit increase in the firm's profit, how much is the stock return increases? So that type of answer we can also get from this econometric analysis. I am sorry, here all the numbers are 1, 1, 1, but these are the different examples actually. Okay. Then the other example, whether arranged marriage, is arranged marriage more stable than love marriage? This is also another example. Now marriage, first of all, marriage itself, getting married itself is an economic decision making. Why? Because economists, they define marriage is nothing but a mutually beneficial trade, right? A mutually beneficial contract. And that stability, basically whether the marriage contract will be stable or not, that depends on whether both the parties involved in that contract are mutually beneficial or not. At any point of time, if the benefit of that contract, of that marriage contract is gets distributed skewedly towards one person, then there is a high chance of breaking up that contract, that means divorce. Okay? So we may hypothesize that arranged marriage or love marriage, vice versa, whether what type of marriage is more stable. So that means the research question that comes to our mind is analyzing type of marriage with its stability. Even that analysis can also be done using econometric tool, right? Then this is another example. Does higher economic growth result in improved environmental quality? So basically that means what we are interested here, to examine the impact of economic growth on environmental quality. Now there are two ways by which you can think of this relationship. As income increases, that means what will happen? Increased income comes through increased utilization of resources. We will extract more resources, renewable and non-renewable resource we will extract from the environment. That itself will lead to degradation of the environment. Secondly, in the process of making growth, in the process of making output, what we will do, we will also make pollution. There is no output which is produced without making any amount of pollution. You cannot really think of production of any output which does not generate any amount of pollution. Can you? Can you think of any activity which does not generate any amount of pollution, directly or indirectly? Even when I am teaching, when I am taking this class, I am generating some amount of pollution as well, indirectly. Why? Because I am using electricity. And how the electricity is generated? By burning the fossil fuel. And the burning fossil fuel itself generates amount of pollution in the environment. So that means income or production of output will inevitably lead to some amount of pollution making. Then the question is whether the quality of environment increases as income increases. Why this is so? Because when per capita income increases, then people become more concerned about the environment, because generally we assume that environment is basically luxury good. When income increases, people give more value towards cleaner environment and they are ready to spend more for environment friendly product. They will also create more pressure on the government to bring in stringent regulation, and that stringent regulation will help. By the stringent regulation, policymakers, what they will do, they will ask the industries to take suitable steps so that they can improve their technology that generates output but less amount of pollution. So that means we can assume that at the initial stages of growth or production, environmental quality will degrade. That means pressure on the environment will increase. But once you achieve a certain level of per capita income, then the pollution may come down. So, basically you may think about an inverted U-shape relationship between, let us say, in the x axis we are measuring income per capita and here this is pollution per capita. So, you will get an inverted U-shape relationship. It basically says that once you achieve a per capita a certain level of income, let us say this is x star level of income per capita, then your pollution per capita will come down because of public's preference towards cleaner environment and because of the stringent environmental regulation that government will bring in to curb the regulation, to curb the pollution, right. So, now an econometrician will collect data on pollution per capita and income per capita, and then using the statistical tools we will analyze that economic data and will see whether our our hypothesis, this hypothesis is basically known as environmental Kuznets curve hypothesis, whether that is valid for a particular context or not. Then lastly when we can answer that type of question also. What is the question we are trying to answer? Does ban on alcohol lead to lower road accident? Okay. So, when you ban alcohol, that is an economic decision making whether you will ban it or not, because banning alcohol involves some loss in government's revenue, right. So, government will lose that type of revenue by banning alcohol, and government will see whether banning alcohol is actually beneficial if it actually leads to lower road accidents or not, right. So, that is also, that means, and road accidents, how we will drive in the on the car on the road, that also an economic decision making by the driver. If you run fast, of course you will reach the destination fast, but at the same time there is a cost involved. If you drive fast, then there is a higher probability of making mistakes, that means higher probability of committing accidents as well, right. So, that means both banning alcohol is an economic decision making, the data is coming from the economic decision making taken by the government, and how the drivers, they will drive their vehicle on the road, that is also an economic decision making from the driver's point of view. So, both these data are economic data, and econometrician will analyze a number of road accidents pre and post banning alcohol, or we may also collect road accident data from several states or several districts of a particular state, and all the district might be having different level of regulation in terms of banning alcohol or not, and then we can analyze the data to come to a conclusion, so that we can say whether banning alcohol actually leads to lower level of road accident or not. So, that will help the policymaker to come up with a better regulation. So, that means the point what I am trying to convey here, if you look at all these examples, they are not the data only on GDP, money supply, rate of interest, inflation, so on and so forth, generally what we think as economic data. Rather, these are all economic data reflecting some type of social problem, right. They are representing different type of social problems that we would like to answer. So, it is not related to, or it is not confined only the set of particular variables, GDP, rate of interest, inflation and all. So, that means by now you should understand the application of econometrics is much wider. It is not confined only into the domain of macroeconomics like GDP forecasting about inflation, how much money supply the central bank should make, Not like that, rather you can answer any type of queries that you might have in your mind by applying econometric tools. So, these are all examples of economic data, and this shows how much wider the application of econometrics is in today's world. Okay, in today's world. Then the next question that we are trying to answer, what are the objectives of an econometric analysis? What are the objectives of an econometric analysis? So, there are three broad objectives of econometric analysis. Firstly, drawing inference about the population parameter from the sample statistic.